Okay, here we are. This is a video I didn't feel like I could really do for a long period of time because I didn't have enough experience in Japan to not have my own kind of reflections on what it is here that you probably don't know if you haven't visited, because I was just like anybody else. But now that I've been here for a little over 4 years, approaching 5, I'm ready to do it. So here it comes, the top 10 things that you probably didn't know about living in Japan. Bitcoin, that thing that was so much fun to make fun of your nerdy friends for being interested in until it suddenly wasn't funny. Bitcoin has found its home in Japan, and for the time being, Japan is the center of the Bitcoin universe since there's been tighter regulation that's happened in China. This is really, really exciting because it's an emerging technology, digital cryptocurrency that's having a huge impact on the way that people are exchanging money around the world, and Japan is really embracing it. They've handed out now 11 licenses to Bitcoin exchanges, making them a huge leader in that way. And as well, one of the largest retailers in Japan of electronics, BitCamera, has also shown an all-in approach in that they are accepting Bitcoin at all their stores. And this is unbeknownst to most people around the world, that Bitcoin is now being led by Japan. So how crazy is that? I think it's particularly interesting as well because it challenges the notion that the Japanese are not innovative. What could be more innovative than taking on something like Bitcoin that is just emerging and shows so much new raw potential for what can be done in the financial space and then all the other applications that exist alongside the blockchain technology. Way to go, Japan. Sleeping on the job. You would think in a country that holds work ethic above everything else would be absolutely forbidden. But it's actually for that reason that the Japanese work so much and so hard and get so little sleep. They're the third most underslept people in the world, that they have actually codified this into their work ethic, which is really, really cool. It means that they at least understand that because they're working so much, if somebody were to nod off at work, that you shouldn't come down on them like a hammer. And you'll see this, it's got its own name, it's inemuri. I'm probably pronouncing it with a horrible accent, I usually do. But if people are doing inemuri, it's as a result of them working so much, and you'll see them at work at their desk, kind of like nodding like this, or even in the Japanese parliament you can see it in a number of different work locations. That's not to say that it's without rules. It's not like you could be leading a class if you were teaching here or something, and then while the kids were writing a test that you would pass out in the corner of the room, but they have accounted for it, and there are certain situations that you can sleep in the Japanese workplace and you're not going to get fired. Pretty cool upside to working here. Gift giving. Something in the Western culture, if it's done as a souvenir, is not really an expectation at all. If you do it, it's for somebody that you really, really care about, and it's that sort of icing on the cake of your kindness, that you're really showing them that they're always in your thoughts. It's entirely different here in Japan. When you do omiyage, their word for souvenir, it's something that has a sort of social expectation tied to it, which can be cool, but you should be aware of it. And there's a whole gift-giving culture and stores surrounding this way that they do it. So, for example, if you're a member at some office and you went on a trip, say Hokkaido, Kyushu, wherever it is that you go, returning from that trip, nobody's gonna cut your legs out from under you if you didn't, but there is an expectation that you would come back with an omiyage for everyone. This would create a problem in the Western mind, or the UK, or wherever else you're from, when you immediately scramble to think, well, how are you going to get something for everyone? But like I mentioned, it's done so regularly here, and there's such an expectation to do it, that every single place that you go to and visit in Japan will almost always have a gift shop that has pre-packaged gifts, omiyage, in different amounts depending on the office size that it is that you're working in. And it's all done very beautifully with nice gift wrapping. If it's not already wrapped, they'll wrap it for you. And the real cool kicker of all this is that it'll usually involve something that's locally done. If you go to Hokkaido, there's the Shiroi Koibito, which is like a white chocolate cookie. If you go south, then there's a whole bunch of other things. But each locale is known for having a signature omiyage that you might bring back were you to go traveling and return to your office then afterwards. So interesting. Souvenirs have a higher expectation here. They're a lot more available, and watch out if you don't get your girl one or guy. Now this is one that really threw me for a loop the first many times that I saw it, and I wondered what was going on, but it's really, really cool once you find out. So whenever the Japanese merge into traffic and you've allowed them to enter the road, they always flash their blinkers. And I thought, that's not a turn signal, what are you doing? Now, when I came here, because I'm from a Commonwealth country, I was allowed to have an international license that directly then transferred into a Japanese license. I didn't have to go through anything to drive here, although it was freaky because I was learning to drive on the other side of the road. So I didn't learn about this until afterwards when I was having a fit in the car, losing my shit on this person in front of me for doing the seemingly pointless thing, when they corrected me and said, that person is blinking because you let them in and they're saying thank you. So blinking in Japan when you merge into traffic as a result of someone allowing you in is actually a unique way for them to be able to say thank you for being so considerate, and another layer to this Japanese culture of politeness. I'm gonna enjoy talking about this one because it's the chance to tell an anecdotal story. So Japan, as you probably know, even though this is the you don't know list, has a lot of mass transit in it, tons and tons of trains. And that also means that as a result, you have a lot of railroad crossings. Now, coming from Canada, where as long as when you approach a railroad crossing, you see that nothing is on either side, you can just drive right through them. That's how I drove when I got here. But then one day, I was driving up to one of these crossings, and then I crossed over without coming to a complete stop, and I heard all this beeping behind me, and I thought maybe something's wrong with my car. So I pulled over to the side of the road, and bear in mind at this point I had zero Japanese, I didn't have a clue what was going on, and this elderly man pulled in behind me and then got out of his car, and he was pointing at the back of my car, I thought, and gesturing angrily or something. And I went around to the back of the car and I looked with him, and he was kind of talking to me, and I was like, I don't see anything wrong, but thank you for trying to let me know. I found out afterwards, in Japan, when you come up to a railroad crossing, you actually have to come to a full stop. It's the law here, and it's for safety reasons, although I would think it's safe enough if you paid attention to whether the trains are coming, but it is the law here, and that is why that friendly, angry old man was beeping at me and then got out of his car afterwards. But I was so blissfully ignorant, I didn't know what was going on at the time, but now I do. So if you do come to Japan and you're coming up to one of these railroad crossings, make sure that you stop, or you too may find that you have another angry elderly man speaking in a language that you do not yet understand. Since we're going on this whole driving, blinkers, crosswalks, crossing train tracks theme, we'll go now to the zebra lines that you might see in your own country. Now, if you don't want to die, this will be really, really useful for you. So when you're in Canada, and from my experience when I traveled anywhere else in the world, if you see any of these zebra crossings, you can expect that when a car approaches, they'll yield to a pedestrian who has come to the zebra crossing. And when I say that, I mean it's the white stripes going across the road. You would expect them to stop. Here in Japan, unless it is a lighted intersection, people do not stop at zebra crossings. And a number of times when I first arrived, this almost got me in a little trouble because I was so used to my own culture. And also it's a sort of paradoxical thing where they're so polite with some things like the blinkers, but in this, they do not yield to the pedestrians when they're at a zebra crossing. So when you're here in Japan, if you approach a zebra crossing, make sure to look both ways and wait for the cars to go through. using the mass transit in Japan can be a real joy if what you are used to in your home country is not so good, or not that readily available, or never on time. These are all things that I experienced in my own country. But there are a few things that stood out as strange in the Japanese transit system that I had to learn about afterwards and totally misunderstood. One of these specifically is when you are waiting at a train station. So often it would be early in the morning when there weren't so many people around, so I could hear the ambient sounds around me, and I heard bird calls. And I always thought when I was first here and experiencing that it was the Japanese were so kind and gentle that they allowed bird nests to be made in these train stations. But the truth of the matter is, it's much darker in reality. The bird calls that I was hearing are actually simulated.
You lie!
They are not, the birds aren't real. And that was a huge shock for me, and I found out it's done for a number of reasons. The last of all is kind of sad. That bird calls generally, when people hear them, it's soothing and calming and puts people in a good mood. So if you go to a Japanese train station and you hear these bird calls, don't make the mistake I did. They're not real. There's no owls living in the rafters. It's all simulated. And as well, not bird calls, but you'll notice that there are some cases where you'll hear music, and a lot of the time it'll have to do with perhaps a local legend, as in someone who was a really successful musician, famously grew up there. They'll use their music too. So bird calls and music at the station, both are man-made. Drinking. I'm sure you knew this was coming. So in Japan, things are done a little differently when you go out with your friends, with your workmates, and when you attend parties in regards to drinking. So if I were back in Canada and I finished a night at the restaurant, the hospitality industry, and you went out to drink with your friends afterwards, at most, before the drinking and poor decisions that followed happened, you would do a cheers. That's kind of the natural flow of things. You do a cheers, job well done, everybody had a good night, let's get on with the poor decisions. In Japan, it's way more interesting, and it's got a couple of different levels to it. So in Japan, before you go about your drinking and poor decisions, usually there'd be a little bit of a speech. This isn't necessarily with friends, but say you were at a business function or a school function, and then following that, you don't actually pour for yourself. In Japan, it's commonplace, and the expectation is that you would pour for everybody else, and this continues throughout the evening. So as soon as your drink is low, all this runs into magnified, multiplied bad decisions. People will take note of your drink being low, and they will top you up. It's a great way to get your friends drunk, is the conclusion that I've arrived to. And I like doing it because it's a great way to initially mingle with people when the party starts. So you grab one of your mega beers and you go around and you top everybody up. Where some people get into a little bit of trouble with this is that you can, through your seniority, through your senpai-ness, expect someone to drink when you come up offering for them. So even if they haven't drank, if you are the senpai and you say, oh, well, I want to do this kindness for you, it would be rude for them not to at least take a little and allow you to top up again. So a lot of people cannot quite handle this if somebody's coming over and making them drink again and again and again, but I have not been brought low by this activity yet. And where hard alcohol here and the way that people drink it is more something like Nihonshu with an alcohol content of 20%, as opposed to the shots that you might do in the West, which have 40, I feel like a Viking, and it's never been a problem. And here's to many, many more Bonenkais and other parties where we go around and serve for each other. If you come, do it as well, and you'll probably enjoy the experience.
You want to be a star, don't you?
This next one is not for the faint of heart, and I will admit to being somewhat reticent before I took the dive into the deep end and have now learned to love it. And that is the flavor of horse meat. Japan is notorious for having all these different things that they enjoy eating, and I was aware of sushi and I was aware of eating intestines and stuff like that, but I never knew that horse meat was so sought after and considered so delicious here, and you can find it in so many different izakayas. Shout out to all the vegans and vegetarians. I respect your choices, and I can understand how this could be off-putting, But if you are of the mind that you'd like to try a little bit of meat before we go entirely synthetic and people will wonder how we ever killed any animals, then horse meat in Japan is a really, really interesting thing to try. You do it with a little bit of diced garlic, you do it with a little bit of onion, and it's actually pretty good. Like I say, I was a tough sell, but having tried it a few times, I find it very interesting, and I had no idea that there was such an appreciation for it here in Japan.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
This last one perhaps is hidden away from sight more than any of these cultural differences that you see in living in Japan, unless you go to the movie theater. So I love the movies. I'm a huge movie buff. First of all, it kills me that everything comes out late here because they have to dub it and then also put on the subtitles, but that's a whole nother story. Regardless, something interesting that I noticed once I lived here for a little while and had a chance finally to go to a couple of movies was that at the end of the movie, when back in my own country, and in many others I believe, unless it were a Marvel movie and people were expecting to see some sort of teaser beyond the credits, everyone would leave. Here in Japan, once the movie finishes, everybody stays in their seats. Everybody watches the credits until they all roll by, and then only then will everyone get up and leave the movie theater. It's this whole thing of appreciating creation, of appreciating effort that the Japanese have, which has taken so far here and in so many different situations. And so on the one hand, I think it's really, really cool because it shows in a special appreciation for these people that have made these movies. On the other hand, it feels absolutely crazy because they're not here, they're not in the theater, and this act that we're doing is entirely symbolic. But that they would go so far says a lot about the people here that surround you when you are visiting Japan, and I think something that's very good. Now that we've made it to the end of the video, the burning question is, how did you do? Of the 10 that I listed, did you get 10%, 20%, 30%? Did you get 100%? Did you know every single one of these? And the whole time you were laughing at me and saying, oh, you poor fool. I am so experienced and know all these things. I am the master weeboo. So if that was the case, well done to you. And maybe in fact you know a couple extra that I didn't know about. And that's what I'm really curious to know. So for anybody who watched this video, whether you knew all of them and then you had an extra, or you knew some and you had some that weren't listed, please put it down below in the comments because I'm so curious. I've been here for 4 years. Some people would say that's a long time. Some people would say that's a short time. But I'm always dumbfounded at how I'm always running into these things, and I'm sure it hasn't ended yet. So maybe you can save me from further embarrassment, or at least you can give me a better understanding of the place that I live in. So tell me, what's something that you know that is culturally different in Japan that was not mentioned in this video? That said, thank you so much for watching the video. I really, really, really appreciate it. That's all for now. Many, many more to come. I'm out. Peace.